Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Hello, everybody. Well, just to correct that, I think Andrew did not ask me to talk about triangles. That was my idea. And to start with a disappointment, I will neither tell you how to use triangles in data visualization, nor will I tell you why things usually come in sets of threes. If I've learned something in the last couple of years from TED Talks and that kind of presentations, is that usually they need a catchy title, so I try to do that. And it also makes a neat cover slide until the talk starts. So, when Andrew asked me to do a guest lecture a couple of weeks back, well, he asked me to talk about myself, my background, the work at WebRens that I do, and then about data visualization in general and Tableau in particular. Well, talking about data visualization and Tableau is easy for me because I do it every day. I train people in the use of Tableau, so that's really in my mind all the time. But actually talking about my background and the work that I'm actually doing is something that I don't usually do. And if you think about it, the last time you actually thought about what am I actually doing here, where am I going, how does that all fit together, that's probably a while back. So a couple of weeks back I sat down and thought about, well, how do I approach that whole topic? And at some point I found three basic things that relate to each other. And at that point I thought about, well, we are doing data visualization, so I could use a triangle to actually demonstrate that. And once I came up with the idea, I found a lot of other things that came in threes, which was easy for me because I could reuse the slide over and over again. So the first triangle I'll use is about the work that I do. That is me as an analyst for WebRens, that is WebRens as a company, and then the clients that we work with. I myself, I work in IT for about 10 years, and I started 10 years ago telling people that turning things off and on again is a valid support strategy. They did not always agree, but more often than not it actually worked. And at that time, back home in Germany, I did an apprenticeship in business and IT. And after I finished that, I kept studying, and I started business information systems, which is business and IT as well. So that came in quite handy to deepen what I learned before. And then around 3.5 years ago, I decided that Europe became too small for me. So what I did I moved to New Zealand, and just a short while afterwards, I found a job with WebRens. And that was actually the first time I heard the name Tableau and the term data visualization. So before that, there was I didn't even hear of Tableau, and data visualization was something that I don't think I really was aware of. And these days, I work as a senior consultant for WebRens. So that means I do project management, I do database development. I'm the go-to guy for all things Tableau for the guys in the office as well as our clients. And I run most of the official Tableau trainings that you can do in Auckland. So if you happen to go to one of those trainings in the future, I'll probably be the teacher. Now, WebRens as a company, we do analytics consulting for around 7 years by now. So what does that mean? That means we do pretty much everything that is somehow in one way or the other related to data. So we scrape data from websites for clients. If organizations publish data online, we scrape it and put it in their database. We cleanse data, so you have manual input and people make mistakes, so it has to be cleaned. We model data, so we take data from different places and bring it together, join it to make analysis possible. We do visualizations on top of that. So after we did all the first steps and created a data warehouse of some sort, we do the visualization, do reporting based on what the customer needs. We also do all things Tableau. So Tableau server maintenance and administrations. The biggest Tableau servers in Auckland are all maintained by us. And typically, if a client comes to us with a project, it's usually related to getting the data out of different systems. If you go into companies, they don't usually have one database. They have 10, 20, 50, 100 databases for all kinds of different purposes, which makes it really difficult to analyze the data because you have to get it from different places and bring it together. So we get it out, we put it in a central database. We might apply some business logic, so we might bring in some master data, what kind of products are those, what kind of taxes are on those, these kind of things. And then on top of that, we visualize it mostly in Tableau, because it's a good tool. But if necessary, we also do D3 visualizations, or for example, Power BI. We are based in Auckland, and we are relatively small. We're only around 12 people. Now I say around because we bring in contractors, for example, so that fluctuates a little bit, but usually it's around that number. And then our clients, typically large corporations that typically have data all over the place, and more often than not don't really know what to do with all that data. They have, as I said, hundreds of databases, but they don't really know how to relate all of that and actually make sense of that. And if we talk about in particular, for example, Fonterra, all of their Tableau stuff goes through goes through us. Basically, we maintain their server and make sure that everything works for the employees. Many of the large banks use Tableau, so we support them in how they use it and how they roll it out to their customers. If you do if you send a parcel through New Zealand, in a lot of cases it ends up in one of our data warehouse for the companies to track. And another thing that we did was for a company that organizes the picking and the delivery of kiwi fruit. We helped them with their workflow in analyzing kiwi fruit. So the problem there was, well, they get a sample to see if the kiwi fruit is ripe, that it can get picked. And before they engaged us, it took about a couple of hours to actually analyze that sample and then know if they should pick it or not. We took over that workflow, the whole analysis work, automated it. So instead of a couple of hours, it now takes 3 seconds to basically get the result. There are a lot of other big corporates using Tableau. So for example, Chorus, Sky, Coca-Cola, Spark, for example. We do sometimes more, sometimes less work with them. We don't always administer their servers, but if they have problems with certain things, they usually come to us. So now, how did I end up in the situation where a lecturer from Auckland Uni approaches me to give a lecture like that? And luckily for me, I think I can put it on another triangle. So as I said, I can reuse my slides. And I think this is where all of our work sits. That's all of my work, all of your work. It's somewhere in the middle between tech, business, and design. And when I sort of say tech, that's not only technology in itself. That is mathematics and statistics. That is programming and development. That is technical architecture of computer systems. Business is the knowledge and understanding of business processes. So what makes a company profitable? How do you steer a company? And what kind of decisions in a company are important? So that's only one side. On the other side, business is the ability to communicate the tech and the design topics to business people, to normal people in a way that they can understand what you're talking about. And then lastly, design. It's about displaying things or creating things in a useful way. So usually when we talk about design, and like most people will think about making things pretty. But actually design is not necessarily about making things pretty, it's about making things functional. Designing things, making things in a way that they are as usable as possible for the end user and that they are as easy to use as possible. Now the problem with a triangle like this is that the further you go in one corner, the further you are away from the other two corners. So ideally you want a place in the middle. The problem with a place in the middle is that you are not as much of an expert of one of those areas anymore. So I can know a bit about business design and tech at the same time, but I'll probably never work on a level that a data scientist in the tech corner would work, or a studied designer in the design corner. So there's a bit of a trade-off that you have to consider. And to give you an example, I'll put my own history in there. So I started off pretty much in the tech corner. When I was in school, I taught myself programming. I liked maths. I generally would consider myself a pretty structured person. Now, people do reckon that that's related to my heritage, but I'm not sure if there's any correlation really. I never really considered myself a designer or to be a creative person, really. So, example, when I was young, I liked playing with Lego because it had instructions. I built the Lego model based on the instructions, but I never really built a model based on my fantasy. I didn't really like it. Then I did my apprenticeship in studies, and I moved a bit down in the business direction. I gained knowledge about project management, about accounting, about company structures, that kind of thing. I understood how processes in the business work and how people in the business talk to each other, what kind of information is important for them. It's pretty useful because it enables you to talk to tech people and to business people. And in the end, that's the typical business analysis kind of job. So if you talk to a random business analyst out in the industry, that's usually what they should be good at. It also helps you to understand why people request what they request and see their motivation in that. Now, to move into the design space, that really happened in the last 2 to 2.5 years, I would say. I started working with Tableau, but I found it difficult to be creative with it. Again, I like to do things in order, and coming up with a new design is something that I don't typically do. But then during my work, I kind of learned that there's a difference between being creative and designing things. Being creative is really about coming up with these weird, crazy ideas about a new way how things could look like. Design is really about taking a set of rules and applying them to something to make it as usable as possible. So again, we come back to the rules, therefore something I probably like. The same thing if you have a look at my dashboards, they're usually very, very clean, very concise. There's not a lot of design elements around it. If you have a look at other people's work, they do a lot more with different fonts, and I like putting background images or putting the whole thing more in a theme, while I don't think I'm really good at that. Now, interestingly enough, what works for the work that we do and for every person here in the room, I think, also works for the tools we use. And that's one of the reasons why I like Tableau as a tool. If we have a look on that side, for example, between business and tech, if you look at SAP products, which are typically used in large corporations, they are very technical, very structured. They are aligned to the business processes, but they look horrible. So the design side really isn't that strong in those. On the tech side, if you use R or, for example, D3, it's very technical. You can design anything you want with it if you know how to code it. But if you give it to a business users, they won't have any idea how to actually deal with it. So it's not really usable either. And then on the bottom, something like Photoshop, for example, it's very it's only design focused really. It's used in business for marketing purposes, for publications, that kind of thing. But if you want to bring in quantitative data and change your layout based on the data, that's really hard. If we have a look at Tableau on the other side, it sits somewhere in the middle. So we can argue where it sits exactly and what's the strong suit of Tableau. But I think everybody who uses this can agree that it's somewhere in the middle. It provides technical features, so I can do calculations, I do statistics. It lets you design nearly everything you want if you know how to do it. And it's simple enough to be used by a business person for their daily analysis. Now the disadvantages there, you can't really do, for example, forecasting, machine learning just with Tableau, so you need an external tool. You can't really do exactly whatever you want. There are certain limitations, and then you need to bring in other resources to actually design that however you want. And it's not really business enough to integrate in business processes. I talked about SAP before. That takes care, for example, of your stock in your warehouse, and you can change the things in there. Tableau doesn't really allow that. But it does everything in a way, and you can work around most of the limitations one way or the other. Now, people usually tend towards towards the edges of the triangle. Usually people know one of two things really well and then struggle to do the third thing. Just as an example, who here studies data science or statistics? 1, 2. Okay, who knows somebody who studies data science or statistics? That's a lot more. So if you ask that person if they could explain what they are doing to, let's say, your parents, in a way that your parents understand exactly what they were doing, who thinks that person could do that? Okay, I think there's not a single hand up there. So that's a simple example why that is exactly difficult, and that's at the moment I think a skill that is missing everywhere. And people look for people that can do all of those things, but really struggle to find them. So if you get the chance, try to get strong enough in all of these areas to at least be able to talk to people and give them, tell them what you're doing and explain that to them. One added difficulty with that is that the design side comes with its own challenges. I said before, design, mostly people say, okay, that's making things pretty. Usually it's considered non-functional. It doesn't matter how that's what people say, it doesn't matter how it looks, it matters that it works. What they fail to understand is that usually design means that if something works, it also looks good. You perceive something as looking good because it works, it's easy to use, and it's concise. You can instantly see what you need to see. And that's I think that's the strong thing in design that you need to be aware of. And as said before, that I didn't consider myself an overly creative person. Now I do work in design, and I found for myself that the workaround to that really is that design is justification. So for anything you do on a dashboard, you should be able to justify why you do it, and not in any other way how that is possible. For every line, for every dot, you should be able to answer questions like, is that actually needed? Where would be the most beneficial position, and how will people in the end perceive that? Similarly, for every graph, you should ask yourself, does that actually answer the question to the answer? Does that answer the question that I had in the beginning? And that's actually harder than you would think, because people get attached to their graphs. You spend 4 hours, 8 hours creating something, creating really nice analysis, and you think, well, that's really nice. You check afterwards, well, does that answer the question? And the honest answer would probably be no. But nobody likes to just throw away the 8 hours of work, so you try to make it fit anyway. And that's how bad dashboards, or how not optimal dashboards, really come into play. So what I'll walk through now is just a quick rundown how I would approach that. If you do take notes, that's probably the part where you want to take notes. So just a really simple analysis. Let's assume that sales data for 1 year for the different regions in New Zealand. And the purpose of this is to tell people, to enable people to compare the different regions to each other. Now we could argue, yes, you can compare by the shade of by the hue of the color. But really, if I ask you if the sales in Wellington or Auckland were higher, I would say you struggle with that, just because that's a really similar shape. Similarly, if I ask you how much higher the sales in Wellington compares to Canterbury were, I would say you can't answer that, and that's mostly because you cannot say if something is twice as blue as something else, or half as blue. There's no way for us to really perceive that. So if we change that slightly and change it to bubbles, now it's a bit easier. We can see Auckland is larger than Wellington. We can see that Canterbury is maybe a third, maybe half the size of Wellington. But comparing circles is equally difficult, and the reason for that is, as most of you should know, if you double the diameter, the area of the circle is 4 times as big. And people might be aware of that, but they don't take it into account when estimating circle sizes. So again, that's something, well, the graph tells me, shows me my numbers, but it doesn't really help me to answer the question that I had initially. So the easiest way to do any comparison in data visualization is a bar graph. You can instantly see, okay, which bar is longer, that's the one with more sales. That in itself, it works fine, it does its job, but there's a lot to be improved. So the first thing I would do is, well, in this case, if I ask you if Otago or Nelson had the higher sales, again, you probably would struggle to answer that. So the first thing I would do is to sort it. So now we can instantly see by the order, okay, Nelson needs to have the higher sales because it's above Otago. So that's an easy fix, and for any bar chart, in most likely you actually want to have it sorted. Second thing, why do I have the color? Do I need the color? Does it give me any additional information? And the answer here is no, because the length of the bar actually gives me the information already, so the color is just redundant, so I can get rid of it. Next thing, and now we get into an area where you can argue, well, do we need the scale? I would argue no, we don't, and I'll tell you in a second why. So we can get rid of that. We can also get rid of all the other clutter. There's a state on the top left. Everybody in New Zealand should know that on the left there's regions in New Zealand. And I can probably get rid of the lines in the middle because, well, I don't have an axis there, so the lines are pretty pointless. So I get rid of that as well. But now if I want to see if I actually want to get information out of it, I need the numbers, and I can just put them next to it. And now I don't even need to go from the end of the bar down to my axis to figure out the number. I look at the end of the bar and instantly have the information there. So now I would say I can justify every choice that I just made there. And I personally think that those choices are better than any of the other options that I had. That might change from use case to use case. So you might have a different dashboard where actually, well, no, that doesn't work. You would rather have the axis. Or maybe you do want color in the bars. Or maybe it makes sense to not have it sorted. Maybe you want to sort it by alphabet. There are different options, but for this particular case, I think it doesn't get much better based on my experience. So design is justification, and if you're able to justify every choice, then generally your dashboard will look better than if you're not able to do it. But that's the theory. If you go into business and if everybody would think the same, then my job would probably be pretty boring and maybe even non-existent. So the problem is that businesses have their own rules. People will have their own requirements, and sometimes they might request the exact opposite of what I or you would recommend. So design is not really justification. Design really is compromise. And to show you what that is in a business setting, usually reporting in businesses, even these days, is done in Excel. You have huge Excel sheets with complicated formulas that refer to different sheets with hidden VBA code that does magic in the background. And what comes out at the end is something like this. So that's an actual chart. We'll took out all the important information, but you can, I think, still see some of the problems. So we have around 10 values there. In the bars, the small parts you can't even identify really. You have some colors twice, so you can't really see if, you can't really see if the yellow one here relates to that yellow one or that yellow one. So it doesn't really work. But that's something what businesses operate on. They just do that, and that's fine for them because we don't really know what's better. So in this particular case, we were tasked to actually create a different dashboard in Tableau to make it more usable. And the brief that we got looked like that. So the person in the business actually sketched a mock-up how they expect the dashboard to look at. The convenient thing about mock-ups is that you don't have to deal with all the complexity that comes with developing an actual dashboard. I said we had more than 10 colors. If you can see, the bars here are split in two. They just ignore the fact that we need to put a legend somewhere, that we need to break down the bars further. We need navigational items, we need filters and these kind of things. And these line and bar graphs, they might work well, but as soon as you have different orders of magnitude, it doesn't work anymore, and you can get pretty much no information out of it. So what I did is, well, I started the project and knew that that's not going to work. Like, that's not something that is actually useful in the business. What I did is I created it anyway and showed it to them and explained them, okay, you cannot see what you need to see. And the important bit here is what you need to identify is the large the large bits. The small bits mean that there's no change compared to a previous snapshot in the data, so that's fine. If there's a large change, that's a problem. So it's easy to see for those ones here, but we don't really see if those bright colored ones are really important to look at. I explained that to them, and they kind of agreed with that, but obviously wanted a different solution. So what I came up with was this, which I think instantly you look at this area here and this area here, just because it's the furthest apart from the axis, and it has the thickest line. So that was kind of the idea. When I proposed that first, I was a bit afraid because no, that's a chart that is quite, I would say, experimental, especially if you bring it to a traditional business. But actually they liked it, and they thought, yes, that actually tells me exactly what I need to know, and they went with it. So sometimes people have requirements just because they don't understand how data visualization works. They don't understand what kind of visualization is particularly useful, and how actually to apply these best practice techniques. Sometimes people don't really understand data. So again, this is a real Excel worksheet. I zoomed out, you won't see any of the numbers, but that's the worksheet that I got. You'll see there are a couple of hundred columns, color-coded by various things, and you'll see there are little groups of 5. And that is one value for 5 different years. So 2017, 18, 19, 20, that kind of thing. And people usually give you something like that and will tell you, well, that's standardized. Nothing changes, that's fine. What they mean is a whole bunch of different people work on that, and everybody works to their own standard. So that might be standardized, but that's not the standard that I need to actually work on. So that might be the column names up here might have years as 17 or 2017. Well, I need to have something that is consistent. You can see there are values missing all over the place. You can see that there's color coding, which might or might not indicate something for me to work on, but I don't really know that. So that's a problem. And that's not only a problem for me, that's only a problem also a problem for the business. Because imagine next year they have to add New Year's data. So that means they have to add a column here, a column there, a column there, a column there, and so on. So that's huge workload, and makes it really hard to maintain and to actually work with. Now in this case, we left it for that at the moment. The process to automate that is very complicated because there are different systems involved in different countries, but they needed the reporting at that time. And what I came up with was a dashboard like this. That's the dashboard that is in production. These are not the real numbers, so don't try to get any further insight out of that. But what was interesting was they didn't have any idea, like they had an idea of what the numbers looked like and how that looked like over time, but they've never actually seen it. They were not able to actually look at the data and say, okay, that's really the point. And the important point was that's a pipeline dashboard, so that's the products that they plan to release in the coming years. Well, they're fine until 2021, but then there's a drop, and then no new products in the pipeline. So the business got this information, sees this information, and has to act on it. So okay, we need to talk to our different people to say, okay, we need to investigate in what kind of other products we can come up with to keep our business alive. And I said before that design is compromise. The table here shows exactly the same numbers as the graph up there. If it was up to me, I would remove the table. But people in businesses, they like their PowerPoints. They like to take a snapshot of that and put it in a PowerPoint. They like to print it out and give it to people on paper. And because tooltips in this case don't work anymore, we needed to put a table in there. Also, I tried to argue that we don't really need these borders here because it's pretty obvious what table relates to which graph. The person in the business insisted that the border was necessary, and in this case that was a fight not worth fighting. So I put them in there and that was fine, go with it. One more example, and that's the kind of dashboard that realistically you find in businesses. It's like tables, a bit of graphs, but really a really, I would say, conservative approach to data visualization. What you can see nicely is that the really important numbers are on the top, so I can just look at it and get instantly the information that I need. And then, so you have 3 different areas here, and then you have one area here, and one area further down that gives you the breakdown there. The thing I think I'm most proud of, so I didn't create that dashboard, but I worked on it afterwards. This graph here. In reality, those bars are a lot closer, the numbers are a lot more similar. So what the business decided was a good idea was to truncate the axis here to actually see the gap between the different graphs. Now another thing you can write down, if you do a bar graph, you never truncate the y-axis. Most rules in data visualization is it depends, you can do it either way or the other, but there's no use case ever where you truncate the y-axis on a bar graph. So it took some convincing, but in the end, the person in the business decided, okay, yes, maybe there's some truth to it, so we can actually go with it. And this is the kind of dashboards that are currently developed in companies when they get Tableau. So people usually ask, well, you get Tableau and your reporting is great. You suddenly get all these kind of insight out of it. Well, the reality is, if you get Tableau, you'll most likely end up with something like that. Now, that's the dashboard that I created last night on made-up data, but it's based on a dashboard that looks very similar, and that is including the cut-off names here, that is including that scroll bar, the heap of filters on the right here, and namings like month of order date. That's a bit, it's not really nice to look at. So that's why companies look for people that know Tableau, but at the moment there are not many people around that actually can do that and can work with Tableau. So what do we look for when we do hire people, when we say, okay, now we need to find somebody else? And luckily enough, it's another triangle. I'll promise it's the last one for today. We look for those 3 things. We look for people that can communicate. So you need to communicate to your colleagues, to your clients. You need to understand what they require, and you need to be able to tell them what you can do for them. You need to be able to explain complex technical problems in a way that business users can understand that. If you're not able to do something, businesses don't really like that. So you need to explain to them that there is a technical reason why that is impossible and nobody will be able to do that. You also need to be able to present in front of people. So you might have board level meetings for big companies to tell them, well, why they should invest a couple of $100,000 in a Tableau server. And that's a thing that many people don't really like to do and maybe are not even good at, presenting in front of people, and that's usually because they lack the practice. So there will be presentations in this course, and I know that. And I would encourage you to make use of that. Try to present as much as possible to actually get used to it, to get used to talk in front of 50, 60, 100 people, and expose yourself there, and also accept criticism. People might ask critical questions, and you have to improvise on the spot to come up with an answer to those. And the problem with businesses is you usually don't get a lot of practice there. Like, they expect you to do that, but they also expect you to actually know that already and to be able to do that. The second thing is knowledge. You need to bring a skill, and knowing Tableau by itself is not a skill. It is a skill, but it's not enough. We need people that know Tableau, but also know other things. We need people that know database development, that know statistics, that know business, that know finance. Whatever you do in your studies, try to get good at certain areas that you can bring additional value in there. Because if I have somebody who can use Tableau, but doesn't know how a join works, that doesn't really work for me. And if I know somebody who knows Tableau but can't communicate the insight they get out of it, well, that's not really helpful for me either. And the last thing, and that's personally the most interesting thing for me, is people that are interested. I know a whole bunch of people that use Tableau, that are all right using Tableau, but only a few people that are actually good and like what they are doing. And the reason for that is they practice. They are personally interested in that. I myself, I spend evenings working on Tableau. I play around with Tableau. I read on the internet on Tableau, on data visualization and these kind of things, because I like it. And you can quickly see that in a person if they do off-the-shelf Tableau default dashboards, or if they actually like it and go that extra step to bring in the added value and all the experience they have. And that's something that you can't really learn that. That's more like a character trait, and you have to personally be willing to spend additional time on these kind of things. And it's actually really easy. There are lots of opportunities out there. So if you just want to upskill, if you want to train the kind of graphs you can do, if you want to see what other people do, there are things like Makeover Monday and Workout Wednesday. Once a week, people online will publish a data set, and you're supposed to either make over the graph, or it's a technical challenge and you are supposed to recreate the chart. Now that's not always straightforward, and it takes a lot of thinking and trying around to actually be able to recreate it. But once you did it, you learned a new technique, and you know more about how Tableau works or how data visualization works. Andrew before mentioned the user groups. So there are lots of user groups around the world. So in every bigger city, you will probably find a Tableau user group. We run the Tableau user group for Auckland every 2 months. Usually we are in a business. So on the 2nd of May, we'll be in the BNZ building in their boardroom. And we usually have people talking about real life dashboards. They talk about the dashboards they created, why they created it those ways, the problems they had, and how they solved them. Great events to network. We have people from companies, they are looking for people to hire. We have people that are looking for jobs and just ask around if there's somebody who needs an analyst. They're also great to practice presenting. People usually are a bit shy when it comes to presenting, so you have to push them a bit. If you have an interesting topic about Tableau, how you use Tableau, feel free to approach us and say, okay, I have something, I would like to present something, and we can see what we can do with it. There is the Tableau Fringe Festival, which is an online conference once a year. Well, once a year for different regions. There's one for the US, for Europe, and for APAC. For APAC, it usually happens in August. And those are people around the region that come together online in video chats and just present their topics as well to a couple of hundred people. Great opportunity to find new techniques, to find new tips and tricks, how to use Tableau. And again, if you know something, if you want to present, write to the organizer, and you might be able to present about Tableau in front of 200 people that you can't even see. Generally, Twitter is a great resource. There's a huge community on Twitter around Tableau, where you can post your dashboards, where people post their dashboards, get feedback, you get new ideas of what you can do and how you can apply that. And lastly, the Tableau conference. Now, wait a second, let me finish that train of thought. I don't suggest that you pay for going there. I had a look, including airfare, accommodation, and entry. I think that's around 10 grand. But that's a huge Tableau conference happening once a year, this year in New Orleans. Now, the thing with that is that Tableau offers a competition called IronViz. It's a bit nerdy, I have to admit that. But they have feeder competitions where they give you a topic and you're supposed to create a visualization. The winner of that gets flight, accommodation, and entry for the conference. And then there is the final at the conference. That's 3 people on a stage creating a visualization in front of a couple of thousand people. Great way to win a free trip to New Orleans. Have a look it up online. If you feel up for a challenge, even if you don't intend to win maybe, just participating and seeing what other people do and exposing yourself out there again gives you so much opportunity to learn. Yeah, and that's really it from myself. If you do have questions, you can find me on Twitter. I do have a little blog where I should probably post more than I really do. I do plan to summarize that talk and put it up there. Once it's there, I'll send it to Andrew to send it around. Yeah, and otherwise feel free to come to our user groups to see what other people present on. Thanks. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask away.
I'll start it off. How much of your work involves lots of iteration?
The Tableau side a lot. The data side not so much. So usually, if we think about the projects, the typical projects, usually the visualization part is something that goes on top of it, like an iceberg. It's like the largest chunk is actually getting the data in the proper shape. But once there's the dashboard, usually I get initial requirements, create something, come up with a rough idea, and then go back to the client. Okay, is that what you have in mind, kind of thing. And they don't like that approach because traditionally you specify your requirements and then the IT department comes back 3 months later with a delivered product. So they are a bit afraid to work like that. But then they ask, okay, can you change that line graph to a bar chart? And I click a button and it's there. And they're like, okay. So yeah, and usually for a dashboard like those, it's like maybe 3, 4, 5 iterations until you are at a product that is finalized more or less. I think there was a question up there.
Yeah, great. You said one of the disadvantages of Tableau was its ability to forecast or like integrate machine learning without using a secondary tool alongside it. Do you see it developing into that field over time, or do you think it'll stay where it is?
So what it actually does at the moment is you can integrate R and Python code. So you can actually integrate machine learning and anything you can do in R, you can put into Tableau. But again, that's not native Tableau. You need to know how to use R, how to write Python code to actually bring that in, and you need to know what you're doing there. Tableau has basic forecasting functionality, but I'm pretty sure everybody who studies data science will laugh at that. Good question. I have a couple of weeks. I think the shortest would probably be 2 to 3 weeks. The thing also is that for much smaller projects, it's not really worth it for us to put a whole resource on that. The larger project, a couple of months, 3, 4 months. The biggest chunk again is the data part. So we have one client and we work with them for I think around 12 months now, and we are now in the third iteration, the third kind of project, where it started off with, okay, we just need the data from our different systems, don't worry about visualizing them, and then it becomes more and more elaborated to create a more sophisticated system. Yep.
In terms of creating dashboards, what would be like the guiding principles, like kind of creating them?
So in general, I would summarize that as a visual best practice, and there are lots of guides out there that talk about that. The main things would be you put your most important things on the top, your least important things on the bottom. You get rid of all the clutter kind of things, so borders, lines, unnecessary, I don't know, features that you don't really need to make it clear enough. An important part is to talk to the business and try to figure out what they need. Usually they'll tell you what they want. I want a bar chart. And then you look at it and it's like, no, that's not, that might be what you want, that might be what you have in mind, but actually that doesn't really work for that particular case. So it's a lot interpreting what people want and then trying to translate that in graphs and then trying to figure out a flow to put it on the workbook to say, okay, the first thing that people want to see is that, and then based on that they can drill out down in different things to give a guided kind of path through the analysis.
So like tailored for the clients.
Yeah. That's actually a pretty good analogy.
So when you onboard like a new client and they say they want this and you know that it's not the right way, how often do you find that you produce that and then you produce what you would perceive to be feasible?
More often than I'd like to. That depends a bit on the person. So I myself, again, that might be my heritage. I'm quite pushy, and I have a quite strong opinion on how things should look like, and I'm pushing that quite far until I realize, okay, now I can't go any further. They just want it no matter what. Other people might be a bit more reluctant to push back and say, okay, if they want it, they get it. I think my track record is generally quite good. Most of the things, well, most of the time, it's not 100% what I would do for myself, but it's a compromise that I can live with, where I think, okay, that's the best thing that I can do based on the requirements. For example, the one with the 3 charts and the 3 tables. The requirement was it needed to have the tables there because it needed to be printed. Therefore, there's no way of me arguing around that. While if that requirement wasn't there, that chart would look, or that whole dashboard would look completely different.
So if this is something you wanted to get into, would you recommend learning stuff like SQL and R?
It's always good to learn things. I think it's definitely good to learn SQL. It doesn't have to be deep knowledge, so I'm by no means a database developer, but I'm good enough in SQL to manipulate the data in a way that it's useful for my analysis. I personally don't really know R. If you do know it, it opens a whole new area of things that you can do. So we have one person in the office that knows Tableau and R, and he does all the forecasting dashboards. So he writes custom R code to create these kind of forecasts to then put it into Tableau. So that would be one of those knowledge things that if you can bring something in there, that's great. And particularly R and design and communication is something that's a bit of a struggle between those two. There are not many data scientists who can communicate that clearly to the business, and the people who can communicate things clearly to the business are usually not that good in data science. Yeah.
So you started from like a solely IT background. How did you find transitioning to where you are right now?
Easy. So the thing was, yes, it was mostly IT. It was a bit database related, a lot of business analysis, defining requirements. I learned networking, programming, that kind of thing. When I arrived here, I knew I wanted to do something with data. I had no clue what I wanted to do, so I had to look for jobs. And then I came across that. I learned that Tableau was a tool that works with data, apparently. And then using Tableau, I found that quite intuitive, and then it was really personal interest again that got me where I'm now. I trained myself to do certain things. I stayed curious to learn how to do new chart types. I networked a lot to find people, to meet people, and then put myself out there. So for example, the Tableau Fringe Festival I presented last August there on hacking Tableau. That's something you'll see on the blog actually. I presented the user group, active on Twitter to meet new people, to get better, and that in the end also enabled me to become a Tableau trainer, to be certified now to teach other people how to use Tableau. So it was a nice journey, and it didn't feel like it was a lot of effort because I liked what it was, and I was personally interested in doing it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What we'll do now is we'll have, let's say, a 10-minute break.